She knocked in the rain. He opened the door but had no idea who he was letting in. It started with 3 soft knocks, in the middle of a storm that drowned out the world. No name, no warning. No footprints leading in, just a girl, soaked to the bone, eyes hollow, standing barefoot at the edge of a stranger's porch. He could have ignored it. He could have closed the curtain and walked away. But something in her silence was screaming. A poor single dad, barely surviving, answered the door. Not it was a cold, merciless night, the kind of night where even the stars hide, and the wind speaks in whispers of sorrow. The rain didn't fall, it poured, as if heaven itself was grieving, and somewhere in the middle of that storm, a knock echoed through the darkness. A poor single dad, Mark, sat quietly in his tiny kitchen, staring at the half-empty plate in front of him. He had just finished warming up a can of soup for his little boy, Ethan. There wasn't enough for both, there never was, but Mark had long made peace with hunger. His son came first, always. The old clock ticked slowly. The power had flickered twice, and outside the world looked like a forgotten battlefield, soaked, cold, abandoned. Then came that knock again, 3 times, soft, but desperate. Mark stood up cautiously. He wasn't expecting anyone who would come at this hour, in this storm, to a house like his. A man with nothing doesn't usually get visitors. He peeked through the curtain and saw a shadow, a figure small, soaked, shivering. A girl, no umbrella, no coat, just standing there. He opened the door slowly, and for a moment, the wind howled right through his soul. There she was, maybe 19, maybe 20, wearing a thin hoodie, her hair plastered to her face, eyes filled with something between fear and exhaustion. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, dripping, her lips trembling. "Please," she finally whispered, "I don't have anywhere else to go." Mark's heart paused for a second. He looked behind her. No car, no suitcase, no shoes even, just her, alone, in the middle of nowhere. He could have closed the door. He could have turned her away, it would have been safer. After all, he had a child to protect. But something in her voice, something in her eyes, it wasn't danger, it was pain. He stepped aside and said quietly, "You can stay for the night." She didn't cry, not yet. She just nodded, stepped inside, and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't say much that night. Mark gave her a towel, a blanket, and the warmest spot near the heater. He even poured what little soup was left into a second cup and offered it to her. Ethan peeked from the hallway. "Daddy, who's that?" Mark gently ruffled his son's hair. "Just someone who needed help, buddy." The girl looked at them, this man and his little boy, 2 people with nothing, yet offering her everything, and for the first time in what felt like forever. Her hands stopped shaking, the hours passed, rain kept pounding the roof like a broken lullaby. Mark asked her name, she hesitated, and then said softly, "Call me Rose." No last name, no details, just Rose. She didn't sleep much. Every time the thunder cracked, she flinched like someone running from something far deeper than a storm. Mark noticed, but he didn't ask. He just let her be. Because sometimes, when someone shows up at your door in the rain, they don't need questions. They just need a place to feel human again. Morning came slowly. The storm had passed, but the world outside was still gray and quiet. Mark made coffee, the last of the cheap grounds he had. It was bitter, weak, but warm. He offered a cup to Rose. She held it like it was gold. Ethan giggled while playing with his broken toy car. Rose watched him, her eyes softening. "Your son's lucky," she said quietly. Mark smiled. "We don't have much, but we've got each other." Rose looked down. Something in her face cracked just for a second. A flash of grief, or maybe guilt. She excused herself and stepped outside. Mark found her on the porch, looking out at the fog. He brought her an old coat. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, "but if someone's looking for you." She turned to him, eyes filled with something ancient. "I'm not running from anyone," she said softly. "I'm just trying to remember who I am." Mark didn't press. Instead, he just nodded, because sometimes kindness isn't loud. It's just a silent door opened in a storm, with no questions asked. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the girl standing in front of him, wet, fragile, Barefoot was the daughter of a man whose name was etched on skyscrapers. A man with more money than most people could imagine. A man who had spent the last 24 hours tearing the city apart looking for her. And yet here she was, not in a mansion, not in a penthouse, but in the home of a stranger who had nothing except a heart big enough to shelter her when the world wouldn't. Mark watched her from behind the screen door, still holding the coat he'd meant to offer, but Rose just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, gazing into the fog like she was searching for something she'd lost in a lifetime she no longer belonged to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, like unspoken truth balancing on the edge of breath. Mark didn't push. He never did. That was the kind of man. He was gentle, simple, unbroken by the world because he had already made peace with being broken. He stepped outside slowly, placed the coat on her shoulders without saying a word, and in that moment, something changed in her eyes. It was almost like she was remembering what warmth felt like. Inside, Ethan played with his toy car on the floor, occasionally looking up to see the strange girl his dad had welcomed with open arms. He didn't ask where she came from. Children have a way of accepting people just as they are before the world teaches them to question everything. Rose finally came back in, the coat now clutched tightly around her frame. She sat near the heater again, watching the flames like they might reveal something. Mark poured her another cup of coffee, and then, for the first time, she spoke more than a sentence. "I ran away," she said, voice low, trembling. Mark looked at her not with judgment, not with shock, but with the same quiet concern he'd shown since the first knock. "My father, he lives in another world," she continued. "He doesn't hear people. He commands them. To him, love is control and freedom is betrayal." Mark listened, not interrupting, not blinking. He knew that kind of silence, the one you carry after years of being invisible to someone who should have seen you first. "He wanted to choose my life, every step, every breath, who I loved, who I was," she said, her voice cracking. "So I left with nothing but my name and a hoodie soaked in rain." She looked up, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I just wanted to feel real for one night." Mark sat beside her. He didn't offer advice. He didn't offer pity. He just said one thing, soft and steady: "You are real. You were always real. You just needed someone to see you that way." And that broke her. She wept quietly, fiercely, like a dam finally giving way under the weight of years. And in that little living room with peeling paint and flickering lights, a girl who came from gold and glass finally felt human again. What Mark didn't know was that the media had already labeled her disappearance a scandal. Millionaire's daughter missing after refusing arranged marriage. Her photo was everywhere, news tickers, social feeds, breaking headlines. The whole city was looking for her, except the one man who had her sitting right across from him. And had no idea, by the time night came again, something strange had settled in the air, a quiet peace. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch. Mark tucked him in with a blanket, then turned to find Rose still awake sitting at the table, sipping the last of the coffee like it was wine. She smiled at him, a real one this time. "Do you ever feel like life gives the kindest people the hardest stories?" Mark chuckled softly. "Maybe, because they're the ones strong enough to turn them into something beautiful." She looked at him with new eyes. Eyes that saw him not as a poor man, but as someone richer than anyone she had ever known. Then came the sound that shattered everything, a car. Not just any car, a black SUV with tinted windows and roaring silence. It pulled up fast, no headlights, just power and urgency. Rose froze. Mark stepped to the window and saw three men step out, dressed in black, with cold determination in their eyes, and in that moment, the truth knocked louder than she ever had. She backed away from the window, her hands shaking. "They found me," she whispered, her breath catching like she'd swallowed fear whole. Mark turned to her. "Who are you, Rose?" She looked at him, a thousand truths sitting on her lips, but only one came out. "I'm not just someone who needed help. I'm the daughter of Victor Harrow. Mark's stomach dropped. Victor Harrow, one of the richest, most powerful businessmen in the country, the name that came with skyscrapers, security teams, scandals, and secrets. The girl he had given soup and shelter to wasn't just a stranger in the rain. She was the daughter of an empire, and now the empire had come to reclaim her. Before Mark could speak, there was a knock at the door, this time loud, sharp, demanding. Ethan stirred in his sleep. Mark motioned for Rose to hide, but she stood frozen. "I can't go back," she whispered. "They'll say it's for my protection, but they'll bury me alive in a cage made of diamonds." Mark clenched his jaw. The knock came again, this time louder. He walked toward the door. His hands weren't just shaking, they were sweating, because how do you open the door, knowing the moment you do, everything inside might fall apart? He opened it slowly. A man in a black coat stepped forward, firm jaw, cold eyes, a voice like steel. "We're looking for someone. Her name is Rose Harrow." Mark didn't answer, because what do you say when the girl you gave your last meal to is worth more than everything you've ever owned? But behind him, Rose stepped into view. No fear in her eyes now, just fire. "She's not here to be owned anymore," Mark said. "She's not going back unless she chooses to." The man in black didn't respond. He just pulled out a phone, dialed a number, and stepped away to speak. And then Rose looked at Mark, eyes locked. "This is where I decide who I want to be," she said, "not as his daughter, not as a runaway, but as me." The man in black stood a few steps back from the porch, whispering into his phone. Rose could hear every word, though he tried to be quiet. "She's safe. Yes, she's here. No, she doesn't look hurt. Just different." That word hit harder than she expected. Different, not broken, not missing, not hysterical, just different. She had run away hoping to find herself, and now, standing in this poor man's home, wearing a borrowed coat, breathing free air for the first time. She had, inside, Mark gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said. "I'll stand with you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, not because she wasn't feeling anything, but because she finally understood that strength isn't the absence of tears, it's knowing when to let them fall. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. Outside, the man returned. "Miss Harrow, your father is waiting in the car. He says you can come if you're ready, but if not, he'll wait as long as it takes." Mark raised an eyebrow. That didn't sound like the Victor Harrow the world knew. But Rose just nodded. She didn't run this time. She didn't hide. She walked outside with her head high, the morning wind brushing against her face like a silent goodbye from the storm that brought her here. Victor Harrow stood beside the car, sharp suit, polished shoes, the kind of man who could buy anything, except the right words to say to a daughter who ran away from his empire. When he saw her, his expression shifted not to anger, not to control, but something almost like regret. He didn't yell, he didn't scold, he simply said, "You okay?" Rose looked at him for a long time. "You didn't come find me because I'm your daughter," she said. "You came because I embarrassed your name." Victor looked down, and for the first time, he didn't defend himself. "You're not the man I feared. You're the man I could have loved," she said quietly. "But you were too busy owning everything to notice the one person who just wanted to be seen." Victor swallowed hard. Mark stood behind her, quiet, protective. Victor glanced at him. "You helped her." Mark nodded. She knocked. "I opened the door." Victor studied him for a moment. "You didn't know who she was, and you still let her in." Mark looked him dead in the eye. "She wasn't a name. She was cold and scared. That's all I needed to know." Victor turned back to Rose. "You don't have to come with me, but if you do, you come as you, not as a deal, not as an image, just you." The offer was real. For once, it wasn't laced with expectations, but Rose didn't answer right away. She turned to look at the little house behind her, at the boy inside who shared his blanket, at the man who gave away his last spoon of soup without knowing her name. That night changed her, not because of what she escaped, but because of what she found. Kindness without cost, shelter without strings, love without labels. She stepped toward her father, then stopped. And turned around, she walked back to Mark, pulling something from her hoodie pocket. It was a ring, simple, gold, engraved with the initials VH inside. My father gave me this when I turned 16. I kept it even when I ran, just to remind myself that someone still knew my name. She placed it in Mark's hand. Sell it, use it, or throw it away, but don't ever let this house go cold. He hesitated. I can't take this. But Rose smiled. You already gave me something more valuable than this ring will ever be. You gave me hope. You made me feel seen. You reminded me who I am. Mark didn't know what to say. He had lived his whole life thinking he had nothing left to offer the world, but in just one night, his warmth had changed someone who had everything. She hugged Ethan goodbye. He didn't want to let go. You'll come back, right? He asked. She nodded, kneeling down to meet his eyes. Someday, with more blankets and a toy car that doesn't squeak. Ethan laughed. Mark smiled through the ache in his chest. And just like that, Rose turned back to the waiting car. The drive away wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like the closing of a chapter you didn't know you were ready to finish. Mark stood on the porch, the coat she wore still in his hands. The porch light flickered. The wind picked up, but he didn't feel cold this time, because something inside him had changed too. Weeks passed, no letters, no calls, just silence, until one day a package arrived. No name, no return address. Inside, a new coat for Ethan. A photo of her smiling with the words, "You opened the door, I'll never forget that." And a deed to the house, paid in full. Mark fell to his knees. Not because the house was his now, but because someone, somewhere, finally reminded him that what he gave away in kindness came back in ways he never imagined. They say it was just one night, one storm, one knock on the door, but for Mark, it was the night he learned that even when you have nothing, your heart might be the most valuable thing in the world. And for Rose, it was the night she stopped running and started living, because sometimes the richest people aren't the ones with the biggest bank accounts. They're the ones who answer the door. When the world leaves someone else out in the rain, some doors don't creak open. They swing wide when the universe decides it's time for two broken paths to meet. And that night, when rain blurred the world outside, a single knock changed two lives forever. Mark never told many people about Rose. He never needed to. Some stories aren't meant to be broadcast. They're meant to be felt, lived, carried quietly like a flame in the heart. He still wore the same boots, still walked to the same job, still raised Ethan the same way, with love, with sacrifice, with warmth. But something inside him had changed forever, because for the first time in a long time, he believed he mattered. He wasn't just a man surviving each day. He had saved someone's soul with nothing but a bowl of soup, a dry towel, and the willingness to see a stranger as a human being, not a burden. Ethan never forgot her either. He'd look at the photo she sent and smile, knowing she wasn't just a dream. She was real. She was proof that good things happen when you open the door, even if the world tells you to keep it locked. And somewhere in a high-rise city skyline, a woman named Rose now walked in boardrooms, not as someone's daughter, but as her own name, her own story, her own voice. She had everything, but the thing she treasured most wasn't gold or inheritance or power. It was the memory of one small, broken house on the edge of nowhere, where she was given nothing and yet everything. Years later, she stood on that same porch again. No storm this time, no fear, just peace. Ethan, now older, ran out first. She kept her promise. A box full of toys, warm coats, and laughter that echoed like sunlight. Mark opened the door just like he did years ago, but this time he wasn't hesitant. He knew exactly who he was letting in. They sat, they talked, they laughed, not as strangers, but as family stitched together by one night of unexpected grace. Because here's the truth the world forgets. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give is your door, your time, your warmth, your willingness to see someone when the world refuses to look. She knocked in the rain, and he opened the door, not knowing he was opening it not just for her, but for a new chapter in both of their lives. One shaped by empathy, not judgment, by courage, not fear, And that is what makes a home, not walls, not wealth, but the heart inside it.